New Rome was a city born of desperation. It's a city born out of fear with a concept of a greater place, a greater nation, a greater place for all. I don't know the name of the guy who really started it. He was only referred to himself as Caesar. It was, again, because the history becomes jaded, there's the heavily political views and the propaganda. And, the priests all say that it was, chosen by God and all the rest of it. But the version of this history that I tell you is, well, probably my own compilation, what I think is the most likely story. See, during the time when the war just started, this is back a ways now, quite a ways, the ozone layer got taken out. There was the war started, and when the nukes went into the air, the birds, the satellites with the Star Wars technology, the lasers, detonated the nukes in the atmosphere, and that's what, of course, took out our ozone layer, but they never told us, so we thought it was all plagues. And as the plagues swept throughout the world, North America, people became very, very afraid. All sorts of prophecies, every backyard religion and crackhead was talking about, this or that. Every possible explanation for pseudo-cults got justification from these plagues, from the lack of the ozone. Caesar was a guy, some people said he was an engineer, and I think that's probably pretty accurate. But he had this idea to initially just sort of create a commune. Maybe it was the stress of living at that time, because you got to bear in mind the stress that exists in the arcologies now is fairly much akin to the stress that existed back at that time, like when there was a very, very stressful time. So there's people who, this is pre-war, just before the war struck, there were people that were mad, totally insane people, and the only way that they were able to function in the society was by medicating themselves. There was, before the core politicals, all became under one conglomerates, and the pharmaceutical companies all drew up truces. I mean, they had their advertising wars on which drugs should be used to regulate these people who were quite obviously mad. I mean, free will capitalism and consumerism had reached epidemic proportions. And when it gets to that level, insanity isn't too far behind. So there was a lot of medication that was floating around, and I think that this man was one of the people who went insane. This is Caesar. Anyway, he after what they said was the plagues, but in actuality it was the ozone. I mean, there's huge sections of the plains, the Great Plains of the United States, that were abandoned, essentially. Like, whole areas were just, farm crops were dying, everything was dying, so there's huge areas that opened up that could have been purchased for next to nothing. Everyone could buy it. And of course, the major buyers for that kind of thing were these religious groups and wackos, and real estate agents didn't care. They'd sell to whoever, so they used to market it that way. The reason why I think this guy was some kind of geological engineer was because he bought a huge parcel of land. I don't know where he got the money to do it, but he bought a huge parcel of land, and in the center of it was an underground spring. And I mean, it was a deep, deep spring, probably one of the deepest, which is really the life essence of New Rome. Because he had water, and more than that, he had clean water, because the earth itself would filter it. And he, either through investors or through just his own money, again, it's not known how he got the cash, but he started building kind of he built a septic system and your basic necessities that you need to have life out there. He built a plumbing situation. He built like a few buildings that had bunks that people could sleep in, and he built, public showers. like a bath type thing. And the reason why, because he had to make everything fairly communal, he went with this. That's when he started calling it New Rome. But that's not new like the old New York. It was like N-U-R-O-M-E. It was he wanted it to be a place of the mind. Like it was not so much a play on Rome as it was a play on neurological. So it was like New Rome that way. He wanted to build a society that was free of hatred, and it was sort of a weird mixture between a commune of love and free love and technology. And he thought the marriage of technology and a lot of these ideals was not only possible, but mandatory for the human race's survival. I mean, that was just his take on it. So after he got it built, he started by having really small, parties and festivals out there. He set up, like I said, the basics. He had sanitation, he had showers, he had water, and because of that, he was able to start growing food, set up hydroponics. And this is another thing that makes me think this guy was an engineer, either geological or he had friends who weren't, because his hydroponics setup he set up there was really, really good. He set up some greenhouses and to go along with it because of the cost. See, a lot of people don't understand that in the vegetarian, it became a vegetarian city. Well, it wasn't a city at that time, but his whole concept for this commune was it was a vegetarian place. Not because he didn't agree with cruelty to animals or any of that, which he didn't, but, well, back then he didn't. But now, it's very, very expensive in terms of water and resources to grow an animal for the purpose of food. Like when you think about, like say cattle, these are actual cattle, not the genetically engineered creatures that they put inside the racks now. But I mean the actual when there were real cows that used to walk around. I mean they would have these farms, and oftentimes wondered why the cows didn't try to escape or anything. But these farms would grow the cattle and they'd feed them and they'd water them. But in water alone, the amount of water that cattle need in order to survive is just brutal. So it not only was it ethical for them not to, have meat there, but it was a practicality thing. They couldn't afford to keep cattle because there wasn't a way to. The amount of food they consumed versus the amount of food they produced wasn't feasible for New Rome. So that was one of the reasons why it became a vegetarian city. And rather than have people import, I mean, if you brought food, no one really cared if you went out to these festivals. But I mean, on the whole, the way the festivals were geared were kind of getting away from the whole meat thing, away from the consuming of others, that type of thing. It became this place to go where you could have these amazing experiences. People would go out there and do artwork in the middle of the desert. It was just incredible. Well, it was becoming a desert pretty rapidly. This was the birth of the wastelands. So people would venture out from the cities. Of course, there's lots of drugs there. I mean, people brought out, they're going out there in the middle of nowhere to essentially to whoop it up. People would die out there, because they partied too hard and they'd perish or whatever. And no one really, the bodies were just taken away. I mean, it wasn't that common. It wasn't like it was, 10 people died a night. But, he started by doing about 4 festivals a year, just at different seasons. There was the spring, summer, fall, and winter festivals. And, there might be a couple people who drank themselves to death or whatever. And they were just sort of taken away, It was never really played up because they knew if the government got a hold of the fact people were dying, they'd shut them down. But because the war was going on, they knew that they wouldn't have too much to worry about with the government because the government had other things to focus on. And, well, having a place where people could leave the cities when everything was turning to hell was good for morale on the public side. So the government tried not to stick their nose in it too much.